Hello, everyone, and welcome. It is Tuesday, June 5th, and we have reached week 2 here. Um, you've now finished out your first round of assignments in week 1, doing the 2D platformer composition and also the sound design and effects. Hopefully, you had a kind of solid grasp of the intention and direction of the assignment overall. Had success with that. I didn't really have anybody contacting me with any big fires or with any big questions overall. So I assume that generally you're had a pretty good grasp of it. But I also know that there's probably still questions and like, did I do it right? And how is it all set up? So and that's why we start out all of our Tuesday sessions here with a bit of peer review. So I have these tracks set up. We've got 3 submissions here for peer review. We're going to take a listen to each of those, and then we'll switch it over to the archive for a discussion of the new assignments for week 2. But excuse me, week 2 is quite similar to week 1 in that you will be doing a new game composition and you will be doing the sound design for that game also. We kind of do that in week 1 and week 2 where we create all of the music and content. And then in week 3, we start getting into the technology and how does it work its way into the game so that we can get everything working and kind of wrapped up by week 4. So that is our intention. Please let me know if you have any questions as we go along. I'll start out by just kind of discussing them as a whole, discussing the overall intention of what's going on with the music, and then we'll go through each one of them. I often find that it's obviously it's a great process for the individual, and hopefully after this first session that it will encourage other folks to submit for week 2 and then into week 3 so that we just get as many different varieties as possible. Because, like I said, it's good for the individual. You get feedback. I talk my way through this. If you're here in the live session, then you can ask questions and we can discuss whatever. But I think it's also equally valuable to see everybody else's. Even if you didn't submit, you see other versions and variations, and the more submissions, the more variety we have, and the more things that we have to discuss. So, excuse me. So yeah, it is. You'll find all the good things and all the bad things that we can focus on and kind of steer towards or steer away from, and and hopefully we'll continue doing more of this through each week. Here, a question in the chat: will we have a chance to fix our music before we program them in the game? Absolutely. You can fix the music all the way up until the end of the month, music and sound effects. Even though we are starting to put everything into the game in week 3, even when you do put them into the game, you still have the opportunity to fix them later on. You can just do everything with the music as it is and change it all the way up until the end. And as long as everything's named the same and has the same format, you'll just kind of replace the music in the game. So not an issue. You definitely have the opportunity to change things as you go, and that's kind of also the point of peer review. I certainly understand this is the first time you're working on this type of project. There's an aspect of it of just wrapping your head around how the music is set up and how it's going to progress. You don't even professionally working on these projects, you don't really understand how things are going to sound until you get them into the game. So you create the music with all sorts of good intentions, and then you finally put it into the game and you really get a sense of what works and what doesn't and what you need to tweak and all that stuff. So between peer review and putting it into the game, you'll probably come up with some good ideas to revise the music a bit, and you can make those changes all the way up to the end. So, okay, let me start out with just an overview of what we have here. First off, as you might notice, each individual student submission, they have their own track with the 9 files that were required for this project. This column over here on the far right, these are all of the main loops. These are 8-bar main loops. And you can see that they're just a bit faster, a bit longer than the rest of the files because they are 8 bars. They need to be set up to loop. There should be no gaps. There should be no fades or anything in there to interrupt the progression of the music from one to the next. And these will jump around in any sort of random order. So when your music reaches the end of a particular file, you can either jump back to the top of that same file, jump to the next one, or jump to the other one. So one thing that we're looking for in these main loops is we are looking for consistency in the composition, in the instrumentation, tempo, time signature, the key that it's in. All of the basic properties are there, are similar between all 3 of these so that they can randomize around and jump around and can go in any sort of order. Here in the chat, no equal power fades at the beginning and end to clear clicks and pops. No, any sort of fade, even milliseconds worth of time, will fade to silence, and you will either hear it as a pop or you'll just hear it kind of blink to silence real quick. So instead, there are ways of creating seamless loops that won't pop. Some of them are from the techniques, the looping techniques that you did last month, where you double the length of the file of like all the MIDI, and then bounce it out twice as long, cut it in half and only use the second half. Exactly. Cut the file in half, switch the 2 sides. That doesn't really work for music. That works for like ambiances and drones and stuff like that. But doubling it, bouncing it twice as long, cutting it in half and only using the second half. That because what happens is any sort of attacks or fade-ins or reverb tails or any of that stuff gets captured after the first pass. And so using the second half, you should be able to loop those pretty seamlessly. That is some of the challenge, always, is finding stuff that actually doesn't pop and click, and you can kind of get a ways around it, but definitely don't trust just the MIDI. Listen to the actual audio files as they loop. So main loops need to loop. There needs to be consistency in the key, the tempo, time signature, instrumentation. So the main thing that's going to be different and unique across all 3 of these main loops is the composition. Mainly your choice of melodic development, how your melody develops, how your chord progression develops, how you should have slight changes from one to the next. It shouldn't just be a 2, 4, or 8-bar loop that just repeats through 3 different files. And that's can also be a big aspect of the composition of this, is coming up with 3 different variations on the same idea that can work kind of in any order. Consistency and mix, all 3 of these look pretty good. Maybe this 3rd one looks a little bit different, but I'm going to guess that that's a difference in instrumentation. Like that, it looks like maybe there's more drums over here, and then something else changes in the 3rd. But it doesn't really look like there's much of a volume or intensity difference. The other ones look pretty consistent overall. So yeah, consistency in all of those aspects. Intros. Intros need to build. They need to rise to meet the main loops. However, whatever the pacing of your main loops is, however fast or intense it is, you need to build up to that point in 2 bars through these intros. So one thing is that the intros should not be able to loop. Sometimes what I'll hear is that the intros just feel like 2-bar extensions of the main loop. a loop will have a consistent intensity all the way across, so it'll loop around. But an intro should build and rise. So it'll rise over time, and then if it tried to loop, then it would fall back down. It wouldn't make much sense as a loop. So an intro and an ending is kind of a one direction kind of thing, and then loops go around and around. So we're also looking for consistency in the instrumentation. Whatever instruments you have going on in the main loops should also be present in the intros. Well, that goes for intros and endings. One thing that I hear pretty often is like the drums are just missing in the intros and endings, so that it's like the drummer just gave up. So just to help the transitions, you want to make it as invisible as possible. So keeping similar keys, tempos, instrumentation, all of that stuff will help. And then the ending cues, first and foremost, they need to end. So things like this, you're going to have to watch out for where they looks like they kind of get cut off at the end. This looks good, where actually all these at the bottom here look good. They do reach silence. They do reach an ending. We have to listen to how long. Maybe kind of some of this stuff might be a little too long. You don't need to bounce that extra stuff, but that's really a small point overall. Unless there's like some super long reverb tail or cymbal crash or something like that, then that's perfectly fine. But it's certainly better to go to silence versus having it be cut off by the end of the file. So long reverbs. Yep, then that's perfectly fine. Yeah, so that's what I see visually. And of course, visually doesn't matter much except for versus listening to it. So if you have any questions, go ahead and post them up, or any comments or anything that you want to mention as we go along. I might have some questions for you if I come up with anything, like what instruments you might be using or what your general intention was. But I think we should be good to go. Let's start here with the first one. I'll typically start with the main loops because that will, let's see. I start with the main loops because it gives us most of the musical information, what's going to happen, and then the intros and endings will kind of tie into all that. Here in the chat, Stephen, you mentioned I didn't name mine correctly. Can you please explain that further? Tiffany, yep, music underscore. That's the only difference here. If you see main loops, you say main loop 1, 2, and 3, which is good, but you need to have the music underscore in front of it. And that is just naming structures, which are very important for games when you have thousands upon thousands of files that are categorized. The naming conventions in our class is by no means standard, because there really isn't a standard, except for you should figure out your own standard. Meaning that when you start working with a team, you together would figure out a standard, or they would like name certain things certain ways, and you just kind of follow along with that and you'd stick to it. So there is no standard, except for you should just have one determined by the team. All right, here we go. very nice work. It's got a great vibe to it. It's got a great kind of groove to it, back and forth. I could see this in like a Donkey Kong adventure or something like that. It's got that the steel drums takes me back to Super Mario Brothers and all that stuff. So definitely fits very well. I like everything's formatted correctly for the game. You've got solid 8-bar loops that transition smoothly. You can probably jump around in any sort of order, so that definitely works. I like the percussion in the background too. I kind of like that. Also the simple syncopated beat, kind of rhythm, bouncy rhythm. Here in the chat, Crash Bandicoot, absolutely. Could definitely hear it in any of those kind of games. The main thing that threw me off from the beginning was I didn't feel like main loop 1 really had a strong melody, which does come in main loop 2. So let's check out that. And I'm guessing it might be from the steel drums, but it's not as prevalent as it comes in, right? So this melody really sticks out as a strong, developing, kind of evolving melody. I think the melody in the second one is the strongest, where you have a kind of a set groove through all of them. You kind of have little flourishes here and there, but the second melody has second cue has the strongest groove. Oh, sorry. Second cue has the strongest melody. The third one is close. I think by going down an octave, it kind of gets lost a little bit. Having it, when you kind of come back up in the second half, it sticks back out a little bit more. And then hearing 2 and 3, once you get to 1, you definitely feel like we're losing the melody. So then if the melody of main loop 1 is supposed to be the steel drums, then they need to really come out a whole lot more. The fact that you use the synth twice, and I'm still guessing if it's the steel drums there, then you might want to make each one of them different as opposed to 2 synths and a steel drum. So I don't know. Main thing I hear is more development through the first one, and maybe just a tweak to the first half of this third loop. Cool. So definitely a cool groove there. Let's do 3 intros. All right. Would like to hear a little bit more build through these. Mostly this kind of goes towards the looping nature of intros. Like this second intro feels like it could just be a 2-bar loop. Right? It makes complete sense just sitting here on a 2-bar loop. So there's really no kind of build to it. The first one has just at the very end a little kind of little drum fill. Or really, it's a lot of it comes from the harmony. Da, 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 da. So the melody, the lead synth rises, kind of goes up the octave and moves up through the scale and will kind of rise to a certain note, but the rest of the drums and everything else doesn't kind of build up in the same sort of way. So try using, especially in the second bar, bringing it up towards a bit more of a kind of a rise to the main loops. Cool. 3 endings here. Let's try these. fact, I'm going to separate these out so we can hear how it goes to silence. Because that's the main thing, is just having everything get cut off at the end. Let's try that again. You could also end earlier. So ending on what, beat 2 of bar 2? Is that what we're beat 3? 2, 3, 4, 2, 2, 3. Like ending on beat 3 of bar 2. 2, 3, 4, 2, 2, 3. Yeah, just don't need those last little tiny bits. So with the endings, it says 2 bars long. Your music has to end within 2 bars. It can end before that if you're going to go beat 3 of bar 2 or beat 1 of bar 2 are a good place. It shouldn't just end on beat 1 of bar 1 where it just hits a chord and stops. But having going 1, 2, 3, 4, 2, and just kind of holding on that 2 should give you a good amount of room to stop overall. And even if you get into beat 3 of bar 2 and you need a little bit of extra room to fade out, then that's fine also. As long you can go a little bit over 2 bars as long as the music stops within 2 bars, as long as the composition stops in 2 bars, or the last note hits within those 2 bars. If it needs a little fade out at the end, that's fine. All right, so I think these are all doing the correct thing. They all kind of step down. They all kind of feel like they're winding down a bit compositionally. They're creating a resolution. They just need to hit that last note and fade to silence, not get cut off by the end of the file. So overall, nice work. The first, everything's formatted correctly. Everything should loop properly. Just a few tweaks here and there, like the melody in main loop 1, the build up through the intros, and the actual endings of the ending cues. Very cool. All right. Let's try the next one here. All right, here we go. Oops, sorry, I was just checking out the different rhythms there. All right, so the first thing that catches me is the mix. I think that the composition suffers a bit from the mix. Like it's mostly clarity and focus. It feels very compressed. So like the certain elements kind of stick out in the mix that really don't necessarily need to be the focus. What sort of compression or limiting did you do? Did you do it on individual instruments? Did you do it on the master, or both, or all of those? because the progression that you're doing, the melodic line that you're doing here, the drum pattern works fine. I think that the drums feel quite squashed. And the melody could come out and be much more the focus. I could really hear the compression on when the start of this main loop 2. In fact, let me go back a little bit. Does that work? There we go. When this main loop 2 rolls over, you can hear the compressor like suck in everything. Like it feels like it just squashes down like a slower attack overall. So watch out for that. That might also be, if you bounced it out twice as long, it'll have the opportunity for the compressor to clutch down a little bit, and you won't hear that sudden hit at the front. With this melody, maybe having a little bit more movement on this one instead of just hitting on the chord change. 2, 3, 4. But just have a little bit more movement. I think you do have a little bit more in the second half. And then the third main loop. It is a pretty strong rhythmic change, which could be all right with, that's why I was listening to the first 2 over again, to make sure that if the first 2 are more consistent, then this might work as having a stronger change. I would, however, warn against fills at the end, because every single time it plays, you'll hear the same fill. So that could get repetitive, especially if it if it chooses main loop 3, 4 times in a row and you hear that same fill at the end, it becomes kind of obvious. So just something to consider. And again, you might not really get a sense of how well it works or doesn't work until you get it into the game. So again, compositionally, I think it just is focus on certain instruments, like focusing on the melody overall and making the balance between the instruments a little clearer. Let's do 3 intros. I'm just in intro 2 hearing the brass. I didn't really notice that as strongly in these. Oh, okay. It's like it's a harmonic instrument following the chord progression. I just hear it stronger here because there's a little kind of brass run. Oops, where's the intros? There we go. Cool. So I like the first one. It feels like it's building up, especially in the percussion. I would maybe like to hear the melody keep rising. Do, 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 as it kind of just climbs up a little bit more. I like the groove of that one. I could have a little bit more build in the second half, but definitely heading in the correct direction. And 3 endings. Okay, so 3 heads back to the tonic, but 1 and 2 feel unresolved in their chord quality at the end. What key are you in? And where does it go in the endings? Doesn't feel like it goes back to the tonic. And so you're in major in the main loops, and then it goes to minor in the endings. Okay, so that's just perfectly fine. I might resolve stronger on just the D here in these endings, or at least in the first ending there. Let me try this middle one again. That feels like it has a stronger ending. This actually feels like it has the strongest kind of tonic resolution. Intros and main loops in D, and then D minor in the endings. Okay. So, yeah, it's a question of do you want to go to the relative or the parallel minor? And I think if you go to the parallel minor, then you should kind of focus more on the minor tonality in there. Maybe like staying away from the strong tonic resolution of this third ending. So just some things to think about. Again, I think everything is formatted correctly. I think compositionally it very much works. It's just kind of pulling it out of the mix, just kind of resolving the clarity of the mix, watching out for kind of pumping and breathing on the compressors, making sure the focus is really on the melodic line, which I really didn't get a sense of being that much of an issue through the intros and the endings. Maybe it's just kind of maybe because they're short or shorter overall. All right, very cool. Excellent work. Third one here. Looking good overall. Looks like you do have a little bit of room to boost up the overall level. You, just in general, for everybody, you do have the opportunity to mix in Wise, but you're going to get a lot better result and more kind of detailed mix in Logic. If you need to just kind of take all of your sound effects and move them louder or softer than all of your music, then that's pretty easily addressed in Wise. But you're going to save yourself a bit of time and effort if you just try to make everything. Typically, you want to, for games, unless there's some agreed upon delivery or like specification, then typically you want to have everything as loud as possible, not completely like compressed and like totally squashed out of your dynamic range and everything's distorted and all that kind of loudness, but pushing up towards 0 and everything comfortably in that range, nothing too low in volume and nothing crazy too loud. Then you can kind of, it's best if you just needed to turn everything down overall instead of everything up. So just a consideration there. So let's go to 3 main loops. very cool. To answer your question here in the chat, back to levels. So negative dB isn't the standard in this class. Not particularly. There certainly are standards in the industry. Some of it goes to, again, just agreed upon formats. Like sometimes you'll say all of the ambiances should be at delivered around -20. And then all of the dialogue is going to be around -3. And all of your sound effects are going to be -6 or -8 or something like that. Just to have general ranges and to make everything, you can trim things up and down as necessary. But there are certain standards, like for your entire game, Sony has standards. If you want to release on the PlayStation, your entire mix for audio, which they'll play your game for like 30 minutes, and they'll use like a LUFS meter, and you'll have a particular range. I think it's something like -22 or -24 over LUFS over 30 minutes of gameplay with peaks. Either at -0.1 or -1. So there are overall standards. Music, there might be certain instances where everybody agrees that -6 is good to start with. That gives, again, just a general range, and then everything can be brought up or down as necessary. So like I mentioned with my other discussion about naming conventions, there isn't any standard in the industry except for you should make a standard, unless it's provided by like the big companies. Like, okay, like if you're going into a movie theater, then Dolby says, hey, you should mix everything at this range. And if you're going for PlayStation or the Xbox, then hey, you should probably use these ranges also, which is often then like just translated over into PC and any other platform. All right. So, so the first thing that I noticed with this one here, again, everything loops properly, everything's formatted correctly, everything transitions from one to the next just fine. A little bit of the repetition in some of the grooves and melodic lines, like this. There's a little change, like you go down a note instead of up a note, or you go up an octave, but it's the same kind of repeated phrasing. So just moving away from, even if you're going to different notes, moving away from the same rhythmic phrases. And you typically can get away with it one time. So you state the phrase and then maybe you repeat it again, or you state the phrase and you change it slightly, and then you state the phrase again, and then you got to change it somewhere else. But if you kind of state the same phrase over and over again, even if you're going to slightly different pitches, can kind of get a bit repetitive. So watch out for the first 4 bars and the second 4 bars of each of those, and just kind of develop that lead melody further, because the groove works, the bass line works, all that stuff. Should fit overall. 3 intros here. So these would be, these feel more like 2-bar loops. Like you could easily set up a loop around one of these and it makes a whole bunch of sense. So definitely use the second bar to build up. And it's mostly the drums. If you're doing like just subdivide the beat, double time the second bar overall. And just keep rising up. Those kind of things. Drums with a snare roll in there. Like, this is a cool groove. So just take the opportunity to use the second bar overall to build up a bit more. 3 endings. The third ending looks a little bit bigger overall, or louder. Let's see. Cool. Cool. I like that third ending the best because it feels like the same intensity that you had over in the main loops. Like the ending 1, and 2, maybe it's just that bass or something, doesn't seem to have the same oomph as the main loops were. You have a little ending on your tag, so that's good. But this one definitely heads to that ending. So I definitely would, if you're tweaking 1 and 2, kind of make them and head them towards ending 3. Very cool. So here in the chat, it's very helpful. I had most troubles with the intros. Yeah, I often, that's a lot of times why I tell people to start with the main loops, is to establish that foundation, and then you can kind of build the intros and endings from that. But I also often hear that, and feel the same way, that the variations, especially in the intros and endings, are a little bit more challenging, because you can think of main loop 1, 2, and 3 as just kind of 3 separate 8-bar loops of the same song. But intro 1, 2, and 3, it's not like intro 1 really goes to intro 2. So coming up with 3 variations, a lot of folks get like, they can get 1, no problem. They can get a second one, probably pretty good, but maybe coming up with the third version of the intros and endings, that still works with everything else, becomes more and more the challenge as you go. So good submissions here. Good stuff to talk about. Again, I hope it encourages other folks checking out the archive to submit for next week. It's all painless and it's all constructive, and we try to, we point out the good stuff and the bad stuff. It gives everybody an opportunity to hear all, like, hey, listen to all this good stuff. Everybody kind of head and do some more of that. Oh, look, these things are not so good, so probably stay away from that. And you end up hearing things and seeing things that you would have never thought of, right? People do things completely different. You had the same exact instructions, same project, same game, but come up with very different approaches to it. And that also speaks to why there are different clients out there, and why different composers are out there, and why one person works with somebody else just according to whatever fits for their project. So hopefully that is beneficial for everybody involved. We're going to turn it over to the archive now for discussion of the new assignments for week 2. Please let me know if you have any questions from the peer review from week 1. Please let me know. Again, it just, hopefully it encourages you again to submit at the end of this week for next round. Here in the chat, with the sound design, could we use sounds that were slightly different? Absolutely. So you're building your own sounds. I suggest that you I provide the original sounds, and I suggest that you import them into a Logic session or whatever, a DAW session, to work on them. But you don't, a bomb explosion still has to be some version of a bomb explosion. But with a lot of the stuff with the vocalizations and all that stuff, you can do wildly different stuff. You can say, or to do a quite variety of stuff, butchered a lot of the sounds to make the waveforms match. Okay, they don't have to necessarily kind of rise and fall in the same sort of way, It's more about aesthetic, how's the explosion sound? How's the gunshot sound? How are the vocalizations fun and entertaining and all that sort of stuff. The original WAV files are there as a guide, but it's not like playing a game of how closely can we match this. They're there for inspiration overall. So absolutely. Again, thanks for submitting for week one. For everybody else, everybody gets, I'll do a video review and feedback of the submission, and I'll be getting through those this week. But other than that, thank you very much. All right, let's go ahead and discuss the new assignments for week 2. So we have a new project. We have a new game. We have a new soundtrack. A new style of game requires a new approach to the music. And so our game this week is called Angry Bots, and it is a demo that is provided by Unity Games. Again, this game is built in the Unity game engine. Next week, in week 3, we'll start talking more about the technology, and we'll discuss game engines and audio middleware and some of the software and tools that are kind of running all of this stuff in the background. And like I've said before, saying game engine is like saying DAW, kind of, sort of, not really, but sort of. Basically, in the same way that a DAW is the tool that you use to make music, a game engine is the tool that a game developer uses to make a game. And just in the same way that there's Logic and Pro Tools, and they give away free projects and here's some recorded music for you to check out and test out how our software works, they do the same thing with games. They can provide versions of the games that people can tear apart, and we can get in there with our music and sound effects. So our new game for this week is a different style of game, different approach to gameplay overall. In Angry Bots here, you are this mercenary infiltrating a robot factory. The robots are none too happy that you're there, and they are bent on your destruction, so they will come after you. And your job is to kind of go further and further into the game world. This is a much more complete game. There is more stuff going on. Let's see here. Where am I? More stuff going on than 2D platformer, or more like there's like a beginning, a middle, and an end. Where 2D platformer, the score would just go up and up and up. This one, there is like an ending to it. You can actually beat the level. It's not a full game. It's just like one level of what would be a much larger game. But it takes about 5 or 10 minutes to complete the first time. And this one is kind of a much more futuristic, techie designed world. Lots of kind of sci-fi influences, robots and explosions and lasers and rocket launchers and sliding doors and technology and all sorts of interesting things for music and sound design. It's not probably an all ages, family friendly kind of game. Much more kind of dark and intense. And our main focus with the music is the idea of ambient and action, switching back and forth between lower intensity ambient music and higher intensity action music. And when I talk about ambient music, I don't really mean the style or genre of ambient music. Not like Brian Eno, Music for Airports, kind of just a slow drone that never changes, never does anything. Ambient just means less than action. Sometimes it's known as battle and exploration. But this is the idea of there's a period of time in the game where you're just kind of wandering around the level trying to figure out what's going on. And lots of games do this, where there's a period of time where you're exploring, and then all of a sudden an enemy jumps out, and there's battle music. And the battle ensues for a particular period of time, and then you either win or lose the battle, and you move forward from that. So same sort of thing here. We have to, if you did nothing else in the game, if you just sat there in a corner and hid forever, you would hear this ambient piece of music. Ambient doesn't mean just a drone, just kind of slow and boring. It can have energy to it. It can have good instrument layers to it. It can have drums and bass and harmony, maybe even melody, but probably we'll leave that up for other pieces of music. But it can have structure to it. It can have development, and it really shouldn't just be one slow drone that doesn't do anything and just sits there. So there would be an ambient piece of music until a battle happens. And when one of the battle happens, one of these robots comes out to attack. And you'll notice that the battles are pretty short, right? So this guy wakes up, he comes to attack, you only hit him a couple of times, and he explodes. This guy comes to attack, and I kind of toy around with him a little bit, run away, let him chase you. And eventually, you'll either destroy the bad guy or the robot, or they will destroy you. And whenever these battles happen, the action music comes in. And then when the battle is over, the action music will leave and return back to just the ambient music. The ambient layer or the ambient cue will always be there, will always be playing. And when you fight one of these robots, then the corresponding piece of action music will come in. There are 3 different types of robots, and each one of them has a different action cue or action theme that's attached to it. And whenever you battle that particular robot, you will hear its action theme. And then when you defeat that robot, that theme will eventually go away. It'll fade out. So you have an ambient cue, and then you have 3 action cues that represent each of the different robots. They can play at the same time and will play at the same time. So you will, no matter wherever you are in the game, you will always be hearing the ambient cue. Then one of these battles starts and the corresponding action cue comes in. So we have to understand, how do we add or subtract this action music whenever we want. That's one of the main challenges here. We have to be able to get into a higher intensity action piece of music and then return back to the ambient piece of music as seamlessly and invisibly as possible. So, how does the game know when a battle is happening? And the answer to that is it uses health points. It uses, you have health points, and the characters have health points. You might not notice, but this yellow bar on his back is actually a game meter or a health meter. And it tells you how long it takes. A lot to destroy you in the game, because it's mostly just to test out and have fun with it. And defeating one of these robots doesn't really take all that much time. So we'll have to discuss how we get back and forth between this lower intensity ambient music and higher intensity action music. Let me explain each one of the robots. The first one here is called the buzzer bot. This is the kind of flies around, is sort of annoying. It zaps you with these little lightning bolts. These guys are called the spider bots. They're basically bombs on legs. They come after you, and if they get close enough, you'll either destroy them, or if they get close enough, they'll self-destruct. They really don't do much except for chase you around and become annoying. These are the most frequent kind of robots on the map. There's another one over here. And let's go inside here. So, and then here is the third robot. This guy's called the mech bot. It's this big RoboCop-looking robot coming down the way here. These I would kind of consider like a mini boss. They're kind of harder to destroy. You have to unload into them to eventually defeat them. And then there's just the same robots across the rest of the map. The good thing with the music and sound is we really only have to focus. I mean, you really are you see everything in the beginning of the level, and all of your music and sound effects will be populated through the rest of the game. So let's go ahead and bring up some of the other material. Let's see. Here's the PDF that you get. Hello? Is that not working? Shrink down. There you go. Okay. So here's the PDF you get. It discusses all sorts of different aspects of the composition of the project. You have action and ambient cues. Why do I keep turning away? There we go. You have action and ambient cues and a discussion of each one of those. How to play Angry Bots, hopefully, should be relatively straightforward, not too difficult to control. You can use the arrow keys to go up, down, left, and right. You can use the mouse to look around and then left click or just click on your trackpad to fire. There's a couple of listening tracks as reference. Different classic games in the style of this kind of sci-fi action game. Musical style. Here we're really looking and focusing on intensity. We want to make sure that whenever those robots come after you, that it's really powerful and strong and intense. You need to feel like the danger of these robots coming to attack. Nothing too chill, nothing too laid back. Sometimes I hear some music and it's like, hey, robots aren't so bad. Let's go ahead and have a cup of coffee or something like that. And they're like, yeah, sure, that's no problem. Which is not what you want. You want intense and strong and loud, and robots are chasing you around with lasers and missile launchers and all sorts of crazy sci-fi sort of stuff. So you want to match that aesthetic. On the other side of that is another thing that I get that is better, but it doesn't work too well, is like Robot Dance Party, where everything is like super hypey dance and not that dark or intense. It's like party time, and that doesn't necessarily work either. So intense and strong instrumentation. I have suggested instrumentation, synths and pads and driving bass lines, gated effects, sweeping filters, bouncing delays, fast percussion, heavy distorted guitars, big fast drums, large brass and strings, cymbal swells and impacts, anything that portrays strength and intensity. Then there's descriptions of each one of the cues, which is basically what I'm discussing now, and how they'll play back. What I really want to get to is the asset list down here. There's screenshots and descriptions of each one of the robots and how they should sound, and just a general overview. Then the asset list. There's a total of 7 files that you will create for this. I mentioned 4 of them so far: the ambient cue, buzzer action, spider action, and mech action. They're each going to be 1 to 2 minutes long, and they will loop 16-bit 44:1 stereo. So don't think about this as 4 individual 2-minute long compositions. Think about it as one composition that can be broken down into 4 parts or 4 stems. So each one of these layers is going to contain unique instrumentation. You shouldn't repeat any instruments between the different cues, so that when you hear those particular groupings of instruments or that thematic line or melody or instrument, whatever it is, you can recognize whatever robot's coming after you. You almost train the player with the music so that they can hear what's coming up next. So let me explain how these 4 files work, and then I'll get into these short stingers here. So when the game starts, If nothing else is going on, you are always hearing the ambient cue. Through the entire game, that 2-minute long ambient cue will be looping around and around. The ambient cue should be subtle. It shouldn't be too much in your face. It can still have a bit of rhythm to it. It doesn't need to have strong percussion, but it can maybe have some hi-hats or a arpeggiated bass line or some sort of gated effect that will foreshadow the rhythm that's coming. And you should you want to lay down the foundation of the progression. This is going to map out how things are going to play back in the how all the layers are going to play back together. All right, so we hear the ambient from the beginning of the game. As soon as you've been attacked, you either shoot the robot or the robot shoots you, then the action music will come in. The action music will come in immediately. It will start playing from wherever it is in the loop, and you will hear action music. This point, you need the strong percussion. You probably need a couple of layers of percussion, bass line, harmony, and probably a thematic. I don't necessarily want to say instrument like a melody, but thematic. Thematic line or thematic instruments or something that tells you what robot is coming after you so that you can give that sort of information and help the player. All right, so first guy, the battle starts, and as soon as he's destroyed, the battle ends. The music's going to start fading out at that point. Then these guys jump awake, the spider music will start, and as soon as they're destroyed, it'll stop playing and it'll fade out over time. So let's go ahead and load up some examples here. Talk my way through a couple of examples of what this might sound like. There we go. All right, so as stated before, you are going to have 4 2-minute, somewhere between 1 to 2 minute long cues or layers, or even maybe think of them as stems that can play back together and play at the same time. The biggest challenge here is going to be dissonance and clashing notes. You want to make sure that there's a lot of similarities between these cues. They need to all start at the same time. They need to end at the same time. They need to be in the same key, in the same tempo, and same time signature, and they need to all loop together. They need to follow a common chord progression. Because even if they're in the same key, if they're all headed to different chords at the same time, it's going to probably not work so well. So you need to, with all of the things that are the same, key, tempo, time signature, looping, starting, stopping, the things that are going to be unique are your choice of instrumentation. Each cue should have unique instrumentation that's only found in that cue. You really shouldn't repeat any instrument lines. You shouldn't copy anything because when the game puts it all back together, it's going to double things up. Like if you have the same drum pattern in multiple cues, when you play them all together, then that drum pattern is 4 times as loud as everything else. So make sure that you have unique instrumentation and then a unique composition. Each cue should have certainly a strong rhythm. That's going to be the most of the action part. And then a thematic melodic line or thematic instrument or thematic phrase or something like that that helps identify whatever robot it is. Probably a bass line to help, although you don't need necessarily a bass in all 4 of them. A chord progression, but you don't also need to put all of the voicing of every single chord in each one of the cues. right? So you write your chord progression, you're going to have 3 or 4 voices per chord. Well, all 4 of these don't need to have all 4 voices every single time. Maybe one of them is just the root, follows the foundation. Another one, you've got the 3rd and the 5th. Maybe another one, you get the 1st and the 5th, if you've got 7ths in there. And you can start, if you write out the chord progression first, you have a basic common structure or skeleton to work from. So let's go ahead and check this out. Just get started here. Let's play. Start with the ambient cue. All right, I am going to we're going to play the part of the game, just mixing these up and down. And the whole reason this thing is going to work in the game is because when the game starts, all 4 of these pieces of music are going to start, and they're going to play together. They're going to reach the end and all loop together, so they're going to constantly be in sync. The only thing is, the player's only going to hear this first one at the beginning. The 3 others are going to be silent. Then the buzzer comes in. So let's do this. Game starts. Game starts, and you hear just the ambient cue. And then once you get attacked here, that's the buzzer bot, and so the buzzer music will immediately come in. And you're going to hear that buzzer music as long as the battle's going on. And then once you defeat that robot, it's going to start fading out. And the game is going to do this a whole lot better than I can and control it in the DAW. But it's going to fade that out. And whenever that robot attacks, that music comes in. So this is the buzzer by itself. So we've added the low strong strings. You got some big timpani hits in there, big low bass drums, and there's these little white noise sweeps somewhere, I think, in here. There you go. So it adds a little bit of layers. So this ambient cue is mainly made up of, has a hi-hat pattern in it, but mostly is a chord progression. This is outlining the chord progression. No, it's a couple of notes that are just kind of presenting the foundation of that chord progression. Here in the chat, it says, so that means we're making tracks separate, so that means the music can't clash. Yeah, you are probably best to think about it as one whole composition. So what I end up doing in my composition session is I'll set up a region just like this, like a particular length that depends on your tempo of your music, and you'll count out how many bars will fit, how many bars you want to use that will fit with between 1 to 2 minutes, and then just start adding instruments. I would often start out with a basic just piano. Just start writing your chord progression, even though it's going to end up probably a very synthetic and very electronic and all that sort of stuff. Start out with a piano or a basic keyboard patch. Write out your chord progression, maybe write a few melodies that could work with it, figure out what instruments you're going to use, and then just keep stacking them on top of each other so that it becomes one cohesive composition. But eventually they're going to be bounced out separate from each other so that the game can use them individually as it needs to. All right, so that is the buzzer. And once that buzzer is defeated, it eventually fades away, back to the ambient. And then you go after the next one. So this spider pops up. When that spider pops up, the music is going to immediately add in the spider cue. It sounds like this. Hi-hat, bass line, a little melodic line that we'll hear is actually a double of the mech cue. Here it is with the ambient. And then this guy's destroyed. This guy chases around a little bit. When that guy's gone, the music will fade out. Until you get after this guy. And this guy is the mech bot. And he comes and he attacks, and it sounds like this. So with that one, you've got strong brass and strings. You basically have the high strings to match the low strings from the buzzer cue. You've got a strong lead melody. This one, where's it coming? Right about here. And you also have the ability to have 2 or even all 3 robots on the screen at the same time. So we could bring in the buzzer cue. Bring in the spider cue. And all 4 of these cues should be able to play together. No clashing notes, no clashing rhythms. Again, think about it as one cohesive composition that with multiple layers that can play at the same time. There are 3 other files that are listed in the asset list. The music buzzer stinger, the spider stinger, and the mech stinger. And those are there to help the transitions from the ambient into the action. The action cues are going to hit quickly, and you do not know where they're going to be in the music. So to help this transition, we add in stingers. And stingers are going to play when the action cue is introduced. So let me give you an example here. I'm going to divide this up like how it will sound in the game. Just kind of set this up so everything is set up correctly. Something like that, something like this. And then we'll put fades. So we got a fade out there, and fade out there, and fade out there. All right, so when the buzzer action comes in, when it comes in here, you'll notice that the buzzer, it'll come in probably in the middle of some phrase somewhere, doesn't have a strong impact, just kind of jumps up. So, I was actually at the end of a sweep there. That's actually kind of luckier than it typically is. Turn off my fade there. Thank you. Let's play that again. So it just comes in there. And so to hide that sudden transition, we can throw stingers in here. And the game's going to do this all for you. A stinger should hit have a strong impact at the front and fade out to silence very quickly. It's meant to distract and create a little bit of interest at that whatever the random point that's going to transition. Provides a little bit of consistency, even though it is kind of just going to be a random point. If you're familiar with electronic music and like drops and impacts and things like that, that is commonly what a stinger could be. Stingers are typically have a strong impact, maybe some low end, maybe it could be a drop, and then there's another layer or two on top of what I call like some modulation or some filtering or a pitch drop or a sweep, filter sweep, or a synth arpeggiator or something like that. These are all kind of strong impacts. They should not be tonal. They should not be rhythmic, because since you don't know where they're going to be played, it might clash. So strong hit, lots of reverb, tails out to silence. There's another one. And like I said, they are there to cause a bit of distraction as you're going from one piece of music to the next. So here's what it might sound like when played against the action cues. And again, the game does all of this for you. You just have to create the material. So it should provide a hit, and then the one should fade out, and the other piece of music will already be there. Here's another one. And here's a third one. So hopefully that gives you a good idea of where to start with the composition. I'm going to play one more here. Let's get rid of that, and this, and this. All right, here's another ambient cue. So this would be a good example. This would be a good example to say that the ambient cue doesn't need to be boring. It doesn't need to not move or do any or have any changes to it. Here, you can hear the outline of the chord progression. You hear a arpeggiated phrase. You hear some percussion, but it's not like a kick, snare, hi-hat pattern. It is sporadic and meant to provide emphasis. Here is the buzzer cue. Here it is by itself. So it follows along, it's got a little melodic line to it. It's got drums, that's probably the most important thing to add for the action cue. Here's a spider. This one's mostly drum kit. Mostly drum kit, got a lot of crash cymbal in there. And here's the mech. Mech sounds cool. It almost sounds like an alarm going off. You definitely have to watch out when all four of these are playing to make sure it doesn't completely overload the master. But a common progression, a common pace, a common rhythm to it that allows each one of these layers to be added and subtracted at any point. Then the game, whenever a new idea comes into play, it can just fade in the corresponding piece of music as necessary. So hopefully that helps in describing how the composition is going to be set up. I do want to show off a couple of things with the sound effects for the sound design this week. Please let me know if you have any questions as we go along, or if you're just watching the archive, then you can send me a message if you need any sort of clarification. So that's the compositional side of things. You also have the sound design, creating sound effects for Angry Bots, 22 sound effects. Again, this is, like I said before, because it's a little futuristic and robots and weapons and things like that, explosions, there's a lot of fun opportunity for sound design. So let me just load up the sound effects. And I would suggest that you do something similar to last time, where you would load the original sound effects into Logic and use them as reference. So let's see, I'll close down this session. Don't save. Get a brand new session here. Now, when you go download this assignment, you are going to get a folder that looks like this. It's called Angry Bots Original Sound Effects. And it's going to, you unzip it and it's going to have two folders. One is called To Replace and the other one is called To Use. There's a total of 60 some odd sound effects in the game, and I don't require you to do all of them. You can use some of the original ones to supplement them. So the one that's called To Replace, these contain the 22 sound effects from the original, these do contain the original sound effects, but these are the ones that you will have to do for the assignment. And the reason is these are the more interesting sound designy kind of sounds, if that really makes any sense. They are the more obvious weapons and robot kind of sound effects. The ones to use, these are some ambiances and interior shots. Then there's like bullet impacts and ricochets, and then there's also footsteps. So you're probably not going to win any awards off of your footstep design. You're not going to get hired off of your ricochet. Well, who knows? Maybe you would. But more likely, this is a focus on the music and the and more important sound effects. So something to consider, but we definitely are going to do and replace the to replace. I include the other ones there because you can and are encouraged to do all of it, so that whenever you show this off, you can say, I did everything in this game. Otherwise, some of the original sound effects will be there still. But let's just use the To Replace folder. I'm going to take all of these sound effects and I'm going to drag them onto a track here in Logic. Open, place all the files on one track, yes. It always comes up with, actually this one doesn't. If it comes up and asks you if you need to change your sample rate, just change the sample rates of the files. That's fine. You're going to bounce them out anyway. All right, then once you have the original sound effects on here, you would probably spend some time. You'd probably clean this up a little bit. They don't need to be right on top of each other. So take these and separate them out a bit. Oh, that didn't work. Well, Logic, come on. You can cooperate with me. There we go. Do that. Do that. And you don't need to watch me do all of these. But just trust me, separate them out a little bit so that there's a little gap in there. So when you bounce everything, you have a little room. Then you would create a couple of blank tracks down below. And build all of your sound design directly below the original sounds. But listen to the sounds as reference for what they should sound like, how loud they should be, what's the shape or like the waveform look like, how loud is it, how long is it, yeah, just the basic properties of that file. And then you would build your own sound effects down below. I'm going to cheat here and just drag these down. You would not do this. Don't do this. This is a bad idea. But basically, if I were to fake it, these would be all of my effects. And you definitely mute out the originals when you bounce. You don't want the original files in there. They're really obvious to hear. And you have, then you'd bounce these out and you'd have your sound effect. And you'd go through and design all of these. Let me actually play these. I think this is going to work. Let's see if these broadcast. Airlock door close. That did not work. Hold on. How about this? Let's try that again. There it goes. Okay, this is airlock door close. There are a lot of doors in the game, and there are all the Star Trek kind of doors that open and slide open and close and do all that stuff. So there's a door open. There's a door close, and the assignment has pictures of everything, so you can play through the game. You can see what's what. A lot of times you can get away with the close just being the reverse of the open. Maybe there's a little like chunk, like ka-chunk at the end as it locks closed. But with these, you can use with hydraulics, pneumatics, servos, motors, those kind of things give you those kind of great mechanical sounds. Ambience, exterior rain. It's a rain loop. 30 seconds. Yours doesn't have to be that long, but just a consistent rain clip that you'll hear when you're outside of the robot factory. Interior hum. This is when you go in. This is like room tone. I always think that sounds like the inside of a spaceship or something. Like, as if I knew what the inside of a spaceship sounded like, but I'm sure. Something like that. Flying buzzer destroyed. There's a lot of sound effect. There's a lot of explosions. So the two main things in the game are, not main things, but things that have a lot of sounds are doors, opening and closing, and explosions. So what I would suggest that you do when you go do the sound design is you should be familiar with like the Westar Music Library to get access to sound effects there. There's another resource called freesound.org, which is a website. It's kind of a community-driven website. Westar is great because it has a whole bunch. It has the Sound Ideas Library, which is a great, like, very high quality sound effects library. Freesound.org is community driven. There are lots and lots of sound effects on there. There's also lots and lots of very bad sound effects that are not worth anything. But there's also some very good stuff in there. And for the types of things you're trying to do, a lot of that stuff can be covered there also. So what I would do is say, okay, I need explosions. So go off and search for a whole bunch of explosions, bring them back in, and then combine them all together to make the sounds that you need. Don't work on one sound at a time. Don't say, I need a flying buzzer explosion. Go find an explosion, bring it back, edit it, name it, bounce it. Then go, oh, I need a mech explosion. Then go back out, get another file, bring it back in, edit, name it, format. Like, that takes too long to go back around and around and around like that. Do it in chunks. A lot of times when I do sound design, I'll spend one day just looking through sounds. Like, just go find my library of whatever it is. And I'll just go, here's 25 sounds that I'll eventually put all together. Then maybe the same day or maybe the next day, I'll go back and I'll just edit everything. Put them all together, layer them up, see what works. Then often, if there's time, I might have another day that's just like mixing and bouncing and formatting and delivery, like finalizing everything. So, so if you work in big chunks like that, it often makes the process a bit easier. This is zap electric. This is when the lightning bolt kind of shoots out and zaps you. Mech alert. All of the robots have an alert sound when they recognize that you're there. They kind of wake up and attack. So there's kind of an alarm sound there. Mech destroyed explosion. It's an absolutely huge sounding explosion, which is good for that very large mech robot. These are patrol mech footsteps. As that thing is walking down the hallway, you will hear these footsteps for footstep 1, footstep 2. I think they completely cheated and used the same sounds. We could probably make it a little bit more interesting than that. Missile explosion. So this is when it fires at you. So it shoots its missiles at you, which is this shoot missile sound. So it fires them, and then it either hits you or hits a wall or something like that and explodes. The spider alert. Right? So a little couple of beeps as it wakes up. You don't have to do exactly the same thing. Just kind of do some other stuff. I've heard very cool things where people have done like vocoded robot voices when these things like wake up and it goes attack or something like that. Spider destroyed explosion. These are the bombs on the... That's when you destroy it. This is when it self-destructs. I think that is a horrible explosion sound. It's a real big letdown compared to the other explosions. Proximity. This is when the spider bots are coming after you. They beep. And it's very important. Just make that one little beep. And you don't want it to be very long, because what happens is as it gets closer to you, the beep gets faster and faster. It goes beep, 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 beep. And so if you have like a long sound, that's just going to stack up and sound all sorts of crazy. So all you really need is one really short sample. Spider self-destruct, that's the bad explosion. Interior doors open and close. These are the Star Trek doors that slide open and closed. I always think that sounds like somebody's window being rolled up or down. Locked door opening. Once you get, you stand next to these computer terminals and you hack the computers, and it allows these locked doors to open. Player death. This is when you die. That's not true. That's a gunshot. That is the incorrect sound. Let me get that out of there. Player hit. This is when you take damage. Player shooting. This is the gunshot sound. It's pretty important with that sound. That is going to be a looping sound. And it is important that you match the timing of those shots, because I think it matches the animation or the muzzle flash in the game, which is this. So this is player shooting. Oh, muted. Right, so that's just a loop going around and around. You would probably be best served 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. There's 12 in here. Just build your shots right below that and just use the same timing so that it creates this kind of smooth loop overall. And the last one is, I think it's the last one. Yeah, terminal hacked. Right, just some sort of electronic sound as the terminal is being hacked. I've heard people like type it on their computers, or it sounds like a keyboard, or there's a voice in there that says terminal hacked. I don't know why a computer would tell you it's been hacked, but whatever. So that hopefully, again, will give you a good direction for your sound design. Always make sure that you mute out the original track. Don't include the original sound effects in there. Create 22 sound effects for Angry Bots. And I think that should be it. That's certainly quite enough from me for this afternoon. We did the peer review of the submissions, which was always great. Again, it hopefully encourages everybody to submit also for next round. And then we talked about your Angry Bots and your Angry Bots music and sound design. So if you have any questions, go ahead and post them up in the chat or send me a message. But other than that, let's go ahead and wrap it up there. And I'll see you again on Thursday. All right. Thank you very much.